There we go. Now, before we get started, Emily, do you have anything you want to say?
No, just that also in the chat should be a link to register for the next session. And if you haven't done that already, that's when you'll get the Zoom links. Do it for next week and the week after. Those are the last 2 sessions. And that's all I have to say.
All right. With that then, if Kirsten, you want to bring up the PowerPoint, we'll just jump right into it. No, look at that. All right. Well, I'm going to guess everybody's seeing that okay, and still good on hearing me. So what we're going to do is just get started here. Today, as the title says, we're going to be looking at preserving your historic items and artifacts and how we archive at home. So today is kind of just going to be a mix of 2 things. What we're going to do, we're going to talk about some of the optimal ways that you might preserve some of the items you have. Now, we all have things that we want to keep safe, we want to keep secure, want to be able to pass on down the line. But, I think in a lot of cases, how we keep these things, you throw it maybe in a box, you put it in your attic, you don't think too much about it. You think, it's going to be fine. But I think today we're going to try and do is give you just a couple tips, talk a little bit about, how we do it here and how you can take some of those skills and apply it to what you have in your house. And honestly, a lot of what we do here, as you're going to find, at a most basic level, really requires little investment,
Little investment, some common sense. And really all you can do is do the best you can to preserve the treasures for this generation and future generations.
And what we're really going to tell you more than anything else is absolutely what not to do, right? Because in a lot of cases, the don'ts are more, the do's are important too, but a lot of cases the don'ts can really ruin things you might have if you don't know. In a lot of cases, it might not be things you think about.
Right, and as Ryan said, most of the time it's little things that you can do to help preserve the life of the artifact and treasure.
All right, so let's just jump right into it. Kirsten, if you want to take us to the next slide, please. So the first thing we want to talk about in terms of your items at home is the very basic stuff, basically things related to, as it says up top, maintaining a proper environment. Where are you keeping it? What kind of external stimulus is affecting it? And, how best can you kind of keep some of that under control? And we're going to start off there with one, is something you might not think about, which is light. You think if you've ever left a piece of paper, by a window outside, you might have seen it become faded over time. And the thing is that, a lot of people, oh, if you're going to want something to stay looking nice, again, don't leave it in direct sunlight. But, think about your house right now. Do you have an open window, where the curtains aren't pulled? Is there something hanging on a wall where light, throughout the day is casting directly on it? If you have things like framed documents, framed photographs, paintings, even in some cases, pieces of art, and you have that, sitting directly across from a window where light's getting in the whole day, over time, that's going to fade it. It's, for example, it's why if you've ever been in a museum in many cases, or if you were to, for example, come down to the Bose building here and go to our exhibit space upstairs, either A, they're not going to have windows built into galleries in many cases, or B, where they do have them, you're going to see that the blinds are drawn for the most part.
Right. Blinds are drawn, sometimes UV film on windows, things like that. If you come down to our archives, no windows, which is great for the artifacts, not so good for the people working down here, but great for the artifacts. So, a classic thing is a family photo, especially those taken in the 60s and the 70s with, color film, and you hang it on your wall, and now it's all faded out, looks maybe very pale or very pink. That's from light exposure. So, not saying not to display them. You want these things to be out, but be very, very cognizant of where you are in relation to the light.
And in a lot of cases, when we're talking about some of these do's and don'ts too, there is a fine line between, let's say, keeping something as we would keep it in the archive, which is to say, it's always away for the most part. It's rarely out unless someone's accessing it, and the ability to display these kind of things. You do have to find the balance that's right for you. But again, it's really something to keep in mind here. If you have something that is important to keep safe, you really do want to find a place in your house where, it's not going to be in direct sunlight all the time. Or if it is, perhaps to occasionally draw the blinds when you can have them shut to kind of mitigate some of that exposure. Now, as it also mentions on the slide there, there's a couple other different light types. You're not going to have to really be worrying too much about infrared, but even just, depending on the object, visible light from fluorescents, from LEDs, from whatever, depending on the item, you do want to limit light exposure, in as much as possible. And again, if it's something that you really, really want to keep safe, the best thing you can do, for example, if it's not something that you're going to be displaying on a wall, is to keep it boxed up and away from lighting as much as possible.
Yeah, tuck it away.
Mm-hmm.
Tuck it away. Absolutely. That will extend its life.
And you're going to, speaking of tucking it away, number 2 on here, temperature and humidity. Like I say there right underneath that, this really is probably, the most important thing in some respects when it comes to long-term preservation of artifacts. Maintaining a consistent, as best you can, we'll talk about this, but maintaining a consistent temperature and humidity. And what I mean by consistent is what you want to avoid is major fluctuations. That is probably the most important thing you can do to keep your items safe and lasting over time. Now, I'll jump in here real quick and say, we have it slightly easier in an archive, right? So for example, in our building, the archive space that we have is on a completely different set of heat and humidity control from the rest of the building. It has its own HVAC system, essentially. Now, obviously, chances are, you're not going to have the same level of environmental control in your home. But, why this is important, I think a lot of people, even if they're storing their items correctly, they're following some of the suggestions that we're going to make later. Something that they do is they just kind of, they put these items up in their attic. They put these items in their basement. And the problem that you have there, think about your house. Think about going into the attic. A lot of times, unless you have a finished attic, and in that case, you're planning on storing stuff up there, there's some big temperature fluctuations and some big humidity fluctuations. Again, your basement. Oftentimes, you walk down into your basement, it kind of feels sticky down there. That humidity, that can really be damaging to the items that you have.
And it works both ways. It
Mm-hmm.
works both ways. Too much moisture will ruin paper and photographs, leathers, wood. The other side, too little, will dry them out and cause problems as well. So ideally, you want to be in about 50% humidity. We have a range here. It's hard to do. Very few people have climate control rooms in their home, dedicated to these things. So do the best you can. If you have a really dry home, it's okay, run a humidifier, but don't run it directly onto these things.
Mm-hmm.
But to have them in a space where it's not too dry, it is important as well. So folks who live in very, very moist climates have a lot of problems. People who live in the desert have problems
Mm-hmm.
as well.
Oh yeah. And, and again, so let's put it this way, ostensibly in some ways, probably the best place you could keep some of this stuff is like in a closet in your bedroom, because it's, chances are your house has a little more temperature control, maybe not your closet specifically, I guess, but your house is going to have the interior part more temperature control than that attic or that basement. But again, depending on how much you have, depending on what it is, we 100% get that it's probably difficult. Where I'm going with this, if you have something, if we're starting maybe to move beyond the realm of merely family items, family pictures, to let's perhaps say something more valuable, you might be getting into the realm of wanting to keep it in some sort of temperature controlled storage in like a garden or something like that.
Right.
There does reach a point where you probably want to consider having it professionally stored. Again, if we're talking about something here which is very valuable or which is something that you really, really don't want to have that kind of fluctuation for.
And you notice letter C where it says avoid basements and attics. This is not just a temperature and humidity issue. This is a water issue.
Very important.
What happens in an attic? Roof leak. What happens in the basement? Basements leak. What also are in basements? Plumbing for the house. So these are problematic things, and it's easy because that's where you have a lot of storage, but you have to be very cognizant of it. So when you do store things, you store them even on the living quarters of the house, try to keep them out of areas that might have water exposure.
Exactly. You want to make sure, if the worst happens, that these things are not going to be completely destroyed. And then what Ron said is very good. Basements, it's another reason why basements in particular are bad. You have a lot of leaky foundations, a lot of pipes down there. Or sometimes people, they'll store things in some type of, like outside storage shed or something like that. Like anywhere where water might have contact, you just got to think, once that happens, it can be really difficult to resurrect certain things. Now we'll talk about if you need to resurrect some of those things, how you might do it a little bit later. But the other reason too, attics and basements are not a great place is what I have on number 3 down there, which is pests. You think about when you find, a mouse in your house, you find some bugs, chances are, it's in your attic, it's in your basement, but you put something, you put paper in a box, you leave it behind, a mouse gets in, and you can come back and find that stuff, completely destroyed, chewed through, turned into a nest, and again, that's probably not exactly shocking news to any of you guys here, but it is something to consider. If you have to store some of these things in an attic or a basement, what you should do is you should go every so often just to check to make sure nothing's happened to them.
Right. I mean, it's not just the attic and basement. You can have problems elsewhere, but certainly in those areas that are the most susceptible.
Yeah. So again, and it's honestly what I have down there. Check your items every so often for infestation. Honestly, it's a good idea to really go check your items every so often anyway, just to see if there's any degradation that's happened that you don't know about, to make sure nothing unexpected has occurred. And again, that really does run the gamut. Certainly you probably want to do that for your own sort of family items. But again, if you have anything, what we're talking about preserving here is something which is a little more antique, shall we say. You definitely want to check it to make sure it's holding up okay.
Plus it's fun anyhow.
Yeah, exactly. Why have if you're not going to take a peek?
Exactly.
So storage itself, and again, we covered number 1 there, but avoid the basements and attics where water can get in if it's possible. Hope for the best, plan for the worst, But the other one I wanted to put on there too, you really want to avoid, again, seems obvious, but you'd be surprised. You want to avoid any location that has a history of mold, because once items get moldy, they can be very, very, very difficult to deal with. And particularly if you have an item or particularly a document collection, which gets extremely wet, extremely moldy, and you're interested in trying to preserve that, at that point, you really want to make sure you try to call a professional.
And it travels fast.
Yes.
So even if you're like, oh, just this part of this box got wet, it's going to be okay. It won't. It travels very quickly. So moist and warm is more of an issue. Cold is easier on objects. Kind of going back to that first slide. If you're going to err on the side of keeping something in a place that's either warm or stays colder is always better.
All right. I'm going to start grabbing some show and tell items if you want to start on the material section here.
Absolutely. So, most of us have items we keep, whether it's, baseball cards or pictures or whatever it might be. And, the old way to do it, I'm still guilty of this myself sometimes, shoebox or just any box you have sitting around. That's problematic because you're dealing with materials that are not designed to last. These are ephemeral boxes, things that are made out of inexpensive, very high acid materials that will break down over time and in turn cause rapid breakdown of your keepsakes. So we do have different ways that we can do this. Ryan has a piece.
So for example, if you look at our screen here, I know it's hard to tell. It's probably very difficult to tell, but basically what this is it's a typical archival box.
Can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Okay, so I said what we have right here is a typical archival box. Probably sort of hard to see on my screen, but what it is it's just like Ron said, it's a archival acid-free box. They're kind of bluish in color usually.
Some are white, but regardless, what you want to look for is a specially made archival box, and we'll get into where you can get these from in a moment. But they tend to be marked acid-free, and really good ones are also lignin-free. So it's a high-quality paper product, cardboard product that will not leach and will not break down.
Again, really the main thing you want to look for when you're looking for stuff like this, you want to look for something that calls itself archival grade. And if you're getting into the specs, you want to look for something that's acid free, especially with any type of cardboard or paper. You know, and the thing is that a lot of this stuff, I'm just grabbing something else here. A lot of this stuff, you know, it doesn't look really any different from what you might find elsewhere. So I'm holding up on my screen here. Again, probably a little hard to see, but this is, you know, an archival grade file folder really doesn't look any different than anything else. You know, it basically looks the same. But again, if you go and look at the website that sell these, you're going to see that it's acid free. You're going to see that it is made by these companies. And again, we'll talk about some of those in a moment.
Right. And here's the rule of thumb we use. We have items donated to us that people will donate them in nice little bags or with a backer on it. We get them in file folders. Unless you know where it came from, don't trust it. It is a good rule of thumb to just go ahead and change these items out. If you have a file folder at home you don't know, just change it out. Get rid of it, and you know, get acid-free archival grade folders. The little bit of cost that you're going to expend now is worth it in the long run.
Mm-hmm. And the same thing goes for archival grade plastic bags. You know, again. We'll mention this in a moment here, but you know, the higher end, basically, you're willing to go in terms of absolute preservation, better. You know, with the plastic bag, really, what you want to avoid is something like, you know, like a Glad bag, a sandwich bag. You know, that's the main thing. I mean, you can get kind of like a mid-tier. If you think, for example, about like what a comic book collector might use to kind of hold their comic books in, that's not necessarily archival grade in the way. I mean, it could be. But it's not necessarily archival grade in the way we talk about archival grade. But again, that's going to be better than putting it, you know, like a gallon bag or something like that. When we purchase our items, a company that we use quite a bit is Gaylord, spelled just like it is there on the slide. You know, prices for these kind of things have become affordable over time, particularly at a company like Gaylord. But, you know, there's a number of other organizations. Archival Methods is another company you can buy from.
Metal Edge. There's a number.
Metal Edge.
If you do a search online, you'll see it. And one of the reasons that pricing's come down is that there's more competition, but then also the rise of the kind of prosumer level of it. People scrapbooking and archiving at home. So you can even go to a Michaels or Target. Sells acid-free archival enclosures.
Yep. So again, you know, there's a lot of options out there, and again, a lot of different levels. But at the end of the day, the reason why we're talking about these boxes, the reason why we're talking about these folders, what you want to avoid is to have items just kind of lying around, because that's what's going to expose them to environmental hazards. That's what's going to expose them, you know, to light. And as we allude to in that third thing, there's the other basics. That's what's going to prevent them from touching items that might leach acid into them or have gases affect them, or alternatively touch each other. So I mentioned there under other basics, another big thing that a lot of people either maybe they don't think about, maybe they don't know, is wood. You really don't want to store anything in or on wood if possible. It's like wooden shelves. Big no-no. You go to an archive, what you're going to see, you know, plastic is a little bit better, but even plastic, metal, aluminum, that's the preferred thing. Now, of course, you can put stuff in a box, but wood is a major no-no if you can avoid it, because again, it can leach in.
Right, and a lot of times with bookshelves you can buy commercially, they are particle board, and particle board does what's called off-gassing. So releases gases, which then they eventually break down the wood, but also they break down the boxes, they break down the materials within it. They're really bad for the emulsion on photographs and film. So you have to be careful with that.
And in general, the whole idea, again, behind having the folders, behind having the plastic bags, is you sort of want to avoid having items touch one another. So like I'm going to grab something here real quick. Again, this is hard to see, but if you can see, I'm sort of sliding a plastic bag off of an object here. The reason why we wrap it up like this is so when this is sitting in a box, it's not going to touch. What's going to be touching is plastic to plastic. right? Or if you have folder, it's folder to folder, and then the items inside are kind of protected from one another by these plastic bags or potentially separators of some kind, depending on what you're using. Bless you. So basically, the main goal, again, when you have stuff like that touch, you're going to run into that same issue of things can either leach, or alternatively, if one item begins to just degrade and or something on it is potentially something that could damage something else, another touching, now you're damaging multiple things. Easiest way to think about it, I'm sure something like this has happened. You have a stack of papers, something spills on the top stack, et cetera, et cetera. You go down a couple layers, right? You can sort of see as it kind of, like the puddle or whatever it might be kind of contracts. Just think about that. Something degrades as it's touching itself, you might think, well, there's layers in between, but as it goes, it's all going to damage it on the way down.
Right, and then they tend to bond. And we'll get into some of this again in a minute, but photographs are a really big one.
Yeah.
Especially, again, folks my age, et cetera, that have Polaroids, old Polaroids, they are notorious that if you don't individually sleeve them or separate them, you can use buffered paper to separate as well. If you don't separate them, they will bond to each other. And you'll end up with just a big old stack of Polaroids that, if you can get them apart, tend to be very damaged.
Mm-hmm. Again, the example I use sometimes to think about, if you think about people who collect things for a living, or not, who collect things as a hobby or whatever, sometimes it's for a living, but you think about people who collect something like comic books or like baseball cards. You think about the care they put into those collections, bagging them, keeping them, in boxes and folders, all that kind of stuff. You can, again, that's for a collection, but you can apply those same techniques to what you're doing at home because you want to keep it just as safe. Moving on to the next slide here, handling. This is just a couple quick facts. The first rule of handling something, always be careful. Just no matter what the item is, the best way to touch it is to think of it as more fragile than it is. And the only reason I say it, this seems obvious again, but maybe you have an item which has been folded. Maybe you have an item which is rolled up, and you can't see because it's been folded or rolled up really what the interior of it looks like. And if you just kind of grab it, unfold it, or you grab it, and you go to roll it out, you can end up doing damage to it that you're not going to expect because you don't know what that interior is like. You don't know, what the actual condition of that object is. And the same goes really for just anything else, documents, again, photographs, just in not any casing, and I mentioned it down there, you obviously want to make sure your hands are clean. You don't necessarily have to wear gloves, depending on what it is. You might want to, if it's something which is, again, something that is rarer or an actual expensive item.
Plus, it's kind of cool.
Plus, it's kind of fun. And you can buy gloves like that, like actual archival gloves, once again, at a place like Gaylord or one of those other archival sites.
But a lot of that, it's, again, it's dirt on your hands, it's the oils on your hands, which will break down paper, photographs, metals even. So the less you can handle it with bare hands, the better.
Exactly. And again, depending on what the object is, truth be told, chances are if it's something that you really, really are trying to preserve, you're just better off not handling it anyways. The less you handle it, the less you expose it to anything, the better off you're going to be. So for this next section, adhesive and fasteners, you'll have to forgive me, but I'm going to go on a bit of a rant here, which is here's my best advice for adhesives: don't use it. By which I mean, I've experienced this many times. We get an item that comes into an archive. Someone has given us something particularly that has been scrapbooked, essentially, right? And when it comes time to try and preserve that kind of item, there's not a ton you can do because you're faced with two things. Once it is pasted on, and paste or that kind of adhesive is absolutely the worst thing you can do. That paste not only will damage the item, but once it's on there, it's never coming off. It's, after a certain period of time, safe. By which, so if you've pasted it to something, which I'm going to guess is not actually archival grade, once that starts to degrade, the paper you've pasted it to, it's going to begin to damage your picture. It's going to begin to damage the paper document. If you're, and we're going to get to newspapers here, but if you're like scrapbooking newspaper clippings and pasting it to, let's say construction paper or something like that, oh boy, that's a real recipe for disaster. Newspapers.
Right. That's a double negative.
Yeah, that's real bad. Newspapers are, again, we'll get to them. They're fragile as they are, but what my advice would be is this: if you're going to scrapbook, well, again, if you're going to scrapbook, don't scrapbook. No, I'm kidding. You can scrapbook. But if you're, I will say this: if you're very, very serious about preserving something, scrapbooking is probably not the best idea, but for a variety of reasons. But if you're going to do it, you can buy. I keep saying archival grade, so it's probably just going to start, be reverberating in your head at a certain point. But if you buy those archival grade little corners, you can use those to kind of fasten the picture.
Yeah, so, that's one of those things kind of going back to a place like Michael's or a hobby shop that in the last 10 years or so, because it's become a popular hobby, there are high quality supplies out there. So sure, I know Ryan said not to scrapbook and you want to live on the Ryan, but there are ways to scrapbook and have archival paper pages with the corners that you can do this very carefully. But the bottom line in all of it is make sure that you're using the proper supplies, because even if you're like, they're kind of expensive, I don't want to do it, things will be okay. Trust me, in the long run, it won't be, and you'll regret it. The next bit on there is another big one, which is staples and paper clips and metal fasteners. They are the bane of our existence. One of the first things we do when we get items in, if they have paper clips on them, we remove it. And a lot of times, we get things that have been in less than ideal conditions, coming out of a mill, coming out of somebody's basement, coming out of their attic because they didn't listen to us. But the paper clips will come in and they're rusted into the document.
Oh yeah.
So you want to get those out of there. The little fasteners that poke a hole through and go, bend back. Another thing, they rust. They cause tears. Staples, same thing. Very carefully remove them using an extractor.
Yeah, no, we have. I mentioned it down here. You can just buy if you want to archival
Fasteners. I'll see if I can find a color which will show up on the camera here. Maybe I can't. You can get, they'll hold them up here if I can. They're sort of hard to see, but this is just it's just a little piece of plastic. Here's another one coming in from the side. They're nice colors. So, you can get a little artistic with it if you want to. But you put those on the paper, it just slides right through. They're not made of metal. They're plastic, which is made for this. So they won't cause damage to the pages. They're very cheap.
It's important to remember there's good plastic and there's bad plastic.
Yeah, there is. Yeah. And if you go online too, they'll have lists. If you type in archival grade plastics, what to avoid, they'll have whole lists of, the exact terminology that you need to use when you're trying to buy something. Because some stuff does advertise itself as being true archival grade. And while it might be, again, better than a sandwich bag, it's not always archival grade. Only other thing I'll mention as far as that goes too, sometimes you can see staples and things like that, which advertise themselves as non-rusting. I would take that with a large grain of salt. You're better off just getting the plastic ones.
And again, for no reason, even if they didn't rust, the fact that, you have a staple, you have a couple pieces of paper together, things shift over time, what's that going to do? The staple is going to stay static and it's going to tear the paper. So you're going to cause lots of conservation issues by keeping it in there. You are better off taking it out and not doing it with the old, tooth staple puller, but using, what they call a levitator, which is basically a little blade.
Like a letter.
Right, exactly. Lift up the ends of the staple and extract it that way. You don't want to pull it straight out because you'll tear it.
Yes, yeah. Try and avoid those tooth things if you want to get something out like that. You can jump to the next slide, Kirsten. Oh, look at that. Cleaning and repair. Okay, here's the first rule of cleaning and repair. Don't try it at home. I'm being a little jokey there. There are some things that you can do by yourself, but if it's a major repair job or a major cleaning job, again, because of mold, because of dirt or grime, because of tears, because of photo discoloration in certain things, there will always be a temptation, and there's always methods online that you can read about how you should do this. If it is major, because we're going to give you a couple tips if it is a minor thing a little bit later on, but if it's major, please, I'm begging you, either go to a professional to have it done, or bring it to an archive such as us. We're always happy to advise, and we can kind of tell you what we think you're going to do. Because what's going to happen is this, if it's dirty or something, it's in that condition, I'm not necessarily going to say it's stable, but it can be fixed. If you start going and trying to do it yourself, it is very, very possible in some circumstances that you are going to damage it past the point where it can be feasibly recovered.
Right.
At least not without a very, very great expense.
Right. In the case of Ryan and I, between us, we have 35, almost 40 years worth of experience of dealing with this stuff, and there are plenty of items that come in that are well beyond what we can do.
Yes,
and so it's always better to err on the side of caution. Take it to someone who does this for a living, that can do it responsibly, and that way that you're going to have whatever this treasure is, for multiple generations.
and the other thing, and especially as far as that goes too, at the home level, we do have certain like significantly higher end professional grade devices here. But when we start talking about professional grade cleaning devices, that is also when the price really starts to go up significantly for some of these things, like specialized vacuums and that kind of stuff. So if you do want it, so even if there is certain fixes like we'll talk about that you can do at home, if you really want to make it last, you are going to want it to take it to somebody who has that kind of equipment. And I know that's a pain, and trust me, I understand the urge to try and do it on the cheap and DIY it, but I've seen a lot of stuff that is, people have attempted to do it themselves, and it's ruined. You know what I mean?
Right.
So just
it's Frankenstein. It just doesn't work. So.
And I also just mentioned there, as far as that goes too, when something's happened.
I will say too, if you are going to take it into a professional, again, particularly if something is damaged in something like a case of water, and something like the case of mold, the sooner you get it to somebody, the better. If it sits there in that condition, it's not going to get better, and then sometimes it can get worse.
and more importantly, it can spread.
Yes, especially with mold. Could go back to mold.
Right.
You might think the mold's gone, but it is kind of microscopic, so you want to be careful. Sooner in, the better. Simple jobs, again, I just got to make my point. Simple jobs often don't remain that way for long. So again, just think to yourself: is this as simple as I think it is before you try? But if you are going to do it, make sure you have the right tools for the right job. So a good example, erasers. If you have something such as dirt or another mark that you think you're just going to erase, what I would advise, don't try the big pink school erasers that you've used that we all know and love. Don't use the back of a pencil. You want to use something which is actually made to try and take this off of documents like that. Let me grab one here.
Right. It oftentimes, they look, and they essentially are the same, but they look like art gum erasers, the big yellow ones that fall apart as you're using them. That's, there you go.
This one is sort of, again, the way the light is on here, sort of hard to see, but basically what this almost is it sort of just looks like a big sock. And it has little bits of eraser inside of it, so that when you move it over the surface of something, the little bits of eraser kind of come out. And they're spilling all over my laptop right now because I pulled it out of the bag. But basically, it seems like a pain, but trust me, something like that is going to clean your dirty or smudged object much better than if you just get, like a school pencil eraser and try and do it. Again, that's what I'm talking about when I say if you try and do it yourself, you might end up damaging it more, because once it's in there, if you rub it in like that, it's going to be much more difficult to get out. And I mentioned this down there, but I'll mention it in context with the erasers. Test the little corner first. Same thing if you were like spraying a cleaner on your furniture or cleaner on your carpet, you want to do it in a discreet way. Just test a little bit and see what's going to happen, because, if you get in there and you do a big swipe, you know what I mean?
So take that as our disclaimer.
Yes.
Okay? Test a little area first. Don't go on from there. Another piece that's in there is about tape. And this is a big thing, and this is what a lot of people do. They have a poster, and the poster has a tear in it, or something that's been folded for a long time. Which, again, if you have something it's folded, best thing to do is open it up and store it open. Don't store it folded. But let's say you have, a poster or a copy of a marriage certificate, whatever it might be, and it's been folded for a long time. You open it and it splits. Those can be repaired at home. You don't necessarily have to run off to a paper conservator, but make sure you're using proper tape. It says double-sided tape here. That's, has its place, but you don't want to do.
Yeah, you don't want to, this is, Scotch tape. You don't want to do that.
Yeah,
you want to make sure that the tape you have is made for this. Yeah, I said double-sided tape on there. That's also because I was probably thinking they actually do make archival double-sided tape for when you have to stick things together. But they do just make regular archival tape, which, again, it's going to be difficult to see, but it's kind of like white and paperish that has a backing to it that you kind of peel off. And then generally how this works, if you have, I'm going to grab a piece of paper here, actually, one moment. If you have a ripped piece of paper like
oh my
this,
God, what'd you care?
I know, right? What you're going to do, you want to tape it from the back side, generally speaking, because if you put it on the front, right, think of it this way. If for some reason you had to ever remove that tape, or the tape starts to fall off and there's writing or something on the front, you can take out writing with it. So you want to go to the back, you want to line up the tear so that it, you want to make sure, basically, you want to make sure that the paper, when the tear is there, that it's lined up in front, that the tear is now lined up in such a way that you can see all the writing. And then you want to use your archival tape on the back to try and maintain that, like, basically you want the front to be slightly in front of where the tear is. So if it's split, like, into a wiggly piece, you want to make sure that the wiggly piece that has like the front part of the tear is in front of the back part. That sounds difficult, but if you just tear a piece of paper right now and you look at how the tear looks, you can see what I mean, which is as it tears, there's kind of a front to the tear and a back to the tear.
Right, you have a piece of membrane sticking over. So there are a few different types of tape. There is like what Ryan held up, which is a paper-based tape, which is a document repair tape. There is also archival plastic-based tape.
Mm-hmm.
They can be similar to a Scotch tape that can be used, and it works very well. The archival paper-based is a little harder to deal with. It's the better product, but it's harder to deal with. But I'm going to leave it, this part here, in that if you have to think twice about this, and you're worried about doing it, don't do it.
Yeah.
Let someone else do it.
Absolutely.
It is better to err on the side of caution and allow a professional to work on it than it is to ruin it.
Yep.
And lose it forever.
Yep. So you want to hop us to the next one there? Oh, there we go. So I'm going to run through this just a little bit quickly so we have some time for questions, because we have another, I think, commonly brought up issue after this slide. So real quick odds and ends stuff. Ron mentioned this before. You want to make sure you keep your items flat. And I said this, be very careful attempting to unroll things. Again, if you fold things up, if you roll them, if you put stuff on top of them, there's any deformation to their shape, whether that's photos, books, documents, as time goes on, they're going to begin to retain that shape and the object's going to be damaged. Remove rubber bands. I say other materials, anything which is, if you have a document which is superfluous, much like the staples or the paper clips, even if they're not going to degrade and damage it the same way necessarily, many of them do. Just get it off of there. Again, that's something which is possibly deforming what the object is. You don't want there to be any leaching. If there's any question about it, get rid of it.
Well, here's the thing to think about, and I'll use the proper term because we're in Pittsburgh. When you put a gum band on something, okay? And, I used to do this with my baseball cards when I was a kid. What happens to them after a while? They dry rot.
Mm-hmm.
And that dry rot, so they'll break, you'll lose things, but they'll also, in the process, because they're not made out of high quality material. Again, they're ephemeral. They're not meant to last. So you will get cases where the dry rotted gum band stick to something, and then you're not going to be able to get it off. So it's better to remove these things, play it safe.
Yep. I just three, if you have things on mediums that can degrade, and there's a lot of things that can degrade, but I'm thinking here particularly of things like VHS, or other tape recordings, certain kinds of film, even early CDs. I'm not going to go on a whole CD rant here, but like a lot of stuff from like the late 90s, early 2000s, if you still have that on CDs, a lot of those CDs will degrade. and it will be difficult at times to get materials off of them.
Right. I mean, I think we can probably do a whole session on, how storage of digital media and how to do that in the cloud and things like that. But we don't have time to get into that here. But
yeah,
again, these are things that even if a CD company, Maxell or whoever it might be, made a promise of 100-year CD, don't believe it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of digital migration and a lot of breakdown.
Basically, you just want to have, and again, yeah, we're going to jump through this and jump to the next part, but basically just, it's not a bad idea to have backups, particularly if it's in something that might become obsolete. Because the other thing to think about is, you have a recording on a tape or a VHS or something like that. How are you going to play it in several years? And just substitute VHS for whatever the current mode of storage might be. Always good to have a couple backups. Finally, it's just general advice. Make a list of what you have. It seems, again, basic, but if you have a list of all your stuff and where it's at, it's going to be much easier to find later on and check on. So if Kirsten wants to jump us to, and again, I'm going to kind of move through this one pretty quickly, but we get a lot of questions about photographs. So here's just some photograph facts. Something which is very helpful, I tend to find when you're working with photographs, just for your own benefit. If you're holding on to photographs, writing down somewhere, who is in them and where these come from will help anybody that you're going to give them to. Because, if you have this stuff and you know it in your head and nobody else knows it, and then, one day you're not around, then nobody's going to know what it is. So having this on a list somewhere, who is in it? If you can document the names of these people when they're live, do it. If you have things that go with the photograph, did it come with a letter? Did it come with a book? Have that in there. Where was it taken? Is it on a vacation? Is it at somebody's home? Is it, in a park is nearby? Where did it come from? If you know that kind of stuff. Why was it taken? If you have with some question you run into, you look at a group of people, they're standing, they're smiling, they're giving a thumbs up. Someone says, why they took this picture? And you have to kind of say, I don't know. But again, if it's important to know that this is from, Aunt Mary's party or whatever, put that down on just something, just have, again, to go with my make a list thing, have your list and then have a little bit identifying information. It's going to be very useful. You're going to save people a lot of time down the road. Just a couple other odds and ends related to photographs. And this is something which applies to everything. Don't use ink. If you're going to label something, use a pencil. You can erase it. There's no harm. And we do it all the time. A little bit of pencil in the back of a photo or a document.
And as soft a lead as possible.
Yeah. Just
right.
Don't press hard. And yeah, use the softest lead.
Use an art pencil, or there's archival pencils. If you use an art pencil, they tend to be a softer lead. So not like a hard number 2 pencil type thing. But yeah. It's got to be careful.
Again, I'm getting my little bit in there about scrapbooking. Again, you can scrapbook, as Rod said. I'm a little harsh on it. But if you must, don't use paste. And ideally, you want to do another thing. The real ideal way to do it would be to make a copy of whatever you want to scrapbook and put that in scrapbook and keep the original somewhere else. And along those lines, finally, technology's come a long way. If you can digitally back it up, do it. I'll say the same thing with, we talk about professionally, which is that digital backups are not the perfect answer, because if you have a digital backup and that's your only source, then something goes offline, it's gone forever. You want to always try and keep both digital and physical. But again, you hope for the best, you prepare for the worst. If something were to happen to that original, having that copy in there online is for the best.
Plus, here's the thing, and just real quickly, scan it once, scan it high quality, keep that, put the original away. And when, somebody calls you down the line, your cousin Edith calls you and says, hey, do you have that picture of Sally? You're not scanning it yet. You already have it. You can send it to them.
Yep.
The less you can expose them to light, especially scanner light, the better.
Yeah. Yes, that is true. If you scan stuff a bunch of times, they actually can't get it every time. Right. But like I said, I wanted to get through that because I did want to have some time here to open the floor to any questions anybody had. So if anybody has any questions that they either you can unmute and ask, or you can throw it in the chat and we'll try and answer some questions if you guys have any questions, or if not, that's okay too. But I'll open the floor. Looking for any thoughts?
All right, well, then I'll throw this out there. Anybody have old newspapers sitting around?
Oh yeah, I didn't get the newspapers. That was my bad. Ron?
What do you think about those? What should you do with the newspapers?
Well, we can answer what you do with the newspapers. Ideally, I'm gonna be perfectly honest with you here. Throw them in the trash. No, it depends on the newspaper. But honestly, if in all seriousness, if you're looking at a newspaper between like 1950 and the present, really, chances are there is not and I'm just going to be honest here, from an archival perspective, there is not a good reason to keep it because it is probably elsewhere. You can source that online somewhere else. A lot of people, they want to hold on to a newspaper. Sometimes you see people, they keep the, moon landing thing. The day JFK got shot, that kind of stuff. If you're keeping it for your own purposes, so be it. If you're keeping the newspaper because you think it's, historic, it might be, I'm going to be honest here. Some people keep newspapers because they think they're valuable. I'll tell you right now, they are not valuable. They are all reproduced elsewhere.
Right. But if you have a full edition, look again, everybody has these, JFK was shot, full edition, you're keeping that thing, then sleeve it, put it away, keep it away from other stuff.
Yes.
Period. But if you have, oh, look, it's, an obituary for, Aunt Flo or whatever it is, make a copy.
Yes.
And get rid of the original.
Yes.
It's just, they're going to degrade. It's going to flake. It's going to fall apart. It's going to break down everything else. Now, older newspapers, the older they are,
yes,
the better the paper.
If you have like old newspapers, I'm talking turn of the century here, or any, a little bit after, a little bit before too, you can treat those almost the same way that you would treat old documents. And by which I mean, they will, in a sense, they'll almost hold up a lot better than like the real bad newspapers are like 1950 through like, what would you say, end of the 80s?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
says a lot about journalism too. But regardless, it is the older the paper, the higher quality of the paper.
Yes.
And you just have to be careful in how you store it. As little light as possible.
Yes.
If you notice with a newer newspaper, if you leave it in your car for a couple hours, what happens to it?
Yep.
It breaks down. It breaks down quickly. So I know a lot of folks have newspapers. Again, I'm guilty. I have some too. Just be really careful of how you're storing them. And if you want to keep the whole thing, because I get it, listen, for a living, I don't throw stuff out. I get it. Just keep it separate from everything else.
If you're, let's put it this way, if you're really serious about preserving a newspaper, again, particularly a newspaper, like I said, made in that, post 1950s, kind of 50s to 80s period, really serious about it, that is a case when you really should look into going high end when we're talking about the kind of archival stuff we're talking about, and really following some of the advice we laid out here about very proper storage, minimal handling, archival grade everything, because I absolutely will tell you right now, I know someone out there is probably thinking, well, how much does this stuff really leach? How much does something touching itself really affect something? And it does affect it a lot, just period. But for newspapers, times 10. They really are the most fragile medium.
I mean, they were the cheapest paper. Kind of that next step are magazines. Some magazines will break down very quickly. Weekly periodicals tend to be worse than, say, a monthly. But again, case by case.
Yep.
So any questions?
Anybody anything percolating? Yes.
So I have taken over where my mother started with archiving things, family history. And so she had a newspaper clipping, I want to say from like around 1913 from Galveston, Texas. Our great grandfather, Irish, was the Archbishop of Galveston, Texas. And the obituary was massive because he was there at the time of the huge storm that hit Galveston.
1900.
Yeah. So, and then there's some very interesting family history that is documented in that archive. So I really want to preserve that newspaper obituary. So whatever you can, guidance you can give me on that, because back then they published, the papers were much bigger format. So it doesn't lend itself well to Xeroxing. So I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out the best way to preserve it and even duplicate it. It would be nice to share it with other family members, because it just has so much vital history, both history that affected that area, but also family history, like the fact that his grandfather was in the 1798 rebellion in Ireland.
Gotcha.
Another historic event.
So kind of answering that on a couple of levels. From a professional level, there are companies out there that you can take it to, and they will do large format scan and scan it all for you. And then you can, preserve it, put it away, put it in an oversized box so it's not folded up, and tuck it away and never have to deal with it. And you'll have it digitally, and you can make copies of it. Yeah, sometimes that's not realistic.
Is there something like that in Western PA?
Oh yeah, there absolutely are. I don't have the name.
So maybe offline. I don't want to.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and if you
maybe offline, you can.
Oh no, it's all well. Yeah, and again, if you go to her, and the other thing I was gonna say too, of course, you go to riversteel.com. I think our email address is on there. They should be. Again, it's Ron Baraff over there, Ron Henderson here. You can contact with any of us. We're happy to advise you. We can look at, we can definitely talk about that. The other thing I'd say though, if you're, and just to clarify, so this is a full newspaper, not a clipping, it's the whole thing.
Oh my God. I mean, it was like a big deal when he died.
Yeah.
So it almost takes up the full
page.
Yeah.
Sure. So
huge obit.
What I would say in terms of storage itself, in that case, especially if it's something that you're serious about taking care of, and it'll be a little bit of an investment. It's true. But what I would do, I mentioned it before, Gaylord, there's a couple other ones. You're probably not going to be able to get just one bag. You're probably going to have to buy, buy a couple of them. But I would measure it. I would buy the appropriate size bag, get a backer for it. That'll help keep it stiff. You want, again, if we're being real serious about it, and you should be, you want to get an acid-free backer. So stiffen it, put it in there. And then again, if you really want to be, and this you could probably get just one of potentially, and get one oversized box. They're going to be a big flat box. You can't see the hand motions I'm making, but they're like as big as like a coffee table in some cases. I mean, so they're sizable.
Yeah, I mean, right. And and honestly, again, for a little bit of money, you can get a custom size. There's anything you need out there. Right. But so the kind of lesser way to do this, that's the ideal way. And I would still follow that on. But as far as copying it, you can shoot it digitally. With a digital camera, or even with your phone at this point, because they're so high end. Make that copy. That becomes what you share with everybody.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And that can be shared with all the multiple. I mean, we're talking how many generations the family is just. We're talking Irish Catholics here. So,
so I'm going to tell you something too. It just, not to waylay it too much, but as far as the camera thing goes too, if you know somebody who has like a decently high end camera, I'll tell you right now, that's going to be, depending on what the camera is, pretty close to certain scan qualities for the purposes you're talking about here. Shoot it in portions. If you know someone who has one and they'll just do it for you and send you the files, I'd absolutely do that. Even if it's not, because here's the other thing too. If you do it in portions, chances are, you can always reassemble it later into one big file, but also it's probably going to be easy to read. If you just,
and then you can print them out on archival paper so that paper will last. And that's what you see every day. That's what you handle. Yeah. The original is put away. It's safekeeping. And for your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, it will be there.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So real quick, any other questions? Not seeing any in the chat. In that case, I suppose that concludes this session. I'd like to thank you all for coming out here to visit with us for a little bit. Again, we recorded this, and I believe the library is going to post it. So if you'd like to go back and watch it again for any of those tips, I don't know, should be up eventually on their site, I suppose. Let me see. I think there's a link in chat and also again on the CLO website. Did I see a hand go up? Oh, you're on mute. Oh, you're muted. Yeah, I can't hear you. Still muted. Oh, I'm still muted.
I think she's still working on it.
We're working on it. Well, while she's working on it real quick. Yeah, while she's working on it real quick, just again, there's the link to go to the next sessions in the chat there. So again, feel free to check those out, sign up for the next ones. We have another one coming up talking about how to best use an archive and also one about oral histories. But going back, any luck getting unmuted there? I might be able to. Let me see if I can do it from my end. I can only ask to unmute, unfortunately.
In it.
Oh, I got you now.
There we
You're
go.
there. Okay.
Okay. Are you including your PowerPoint in an email to us or not?
Yes, we'll be doing that as soon as all of the sessions are done. All of the PowerPoints are in one big file, and so we will provide those.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll send them to.
Yep.
We can send them to Carnegie Library at Homestead, and I assume they have you guys because I don't have you guys' contact information, but I assume they do when you signed up, possibly. So I don't see what I couldn't just send it to you. And I think we might have some other handout materials to send you as well. So we can do that. Yep, that's no
Okay.
problem.
Great.
That's great. Thank you all very much.
Yeah, no, it's our pleasure. All right, then. I think we'll call it there, folks. So again, thank you all for coming out,
Okay.
and we hope to see you guys next time.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.